is to continue. Got it. So the first item on the agenda this evening is to continue sort of where we left off with the discussion around the resolution that was passed at the annual meeting related to religious schools and public dollars. So I want to get going, but I want to, before we just sort of dive into it, and that's why I was hoping that David was going to be with us, I kind of want to recap sort of where we left off. And I also wanted to clarify what the ask was as well. David, can you help me out here, right? So I want to make sure. I think what you had proposed at the last meeting was a focus of VSBA testimony that relied more on a previous resolution that was passed by membership versus the most current one that was passed just back in November. Help me out. Am I characterizing this correctly or not?
Yes, but let me first say your history that you produced is awesome. Very, very helpful. I found it very interesting to try to place everything in a context and in a flow. And I'm hoping that we can collectively look at how to move forward, realizing that there is an historical thread. A lot of the things that we're trying to remove or that might be removed have been part of the process for 200 years longer, and that there are good things that come from community involvement and local control balanced with some kind of authority from the top. So the combination of top-down governance versus bottom-up energy and involvement. And I think the academies express that, but that's my interpretation. I wanted to say, I really appreciated your historical putting everything into a context so that you see that academies weren't an afterthought, that were kind of added. They've been part of the process all along. So, and so I was hoping that we could, I guess the thing that I've been struggling with is the same thing that Jim and I protested before on another issue. Another issue, we were talking about a resolution that we should provide universal meals for all students. And in principle, that's a great idea. And I support that. But in execution, there was not a good way to do it without levying a huge unfunded mandate on a lot of schools that would ultimately affect the quality of education that we're able to give our kids. So Jim and I were the only ones that voted against that. And so to me, the challenge here is, how do you go from a principle to some way of actually implementing your principle in a way that doesn't do damage and continues to move the needle forward or move the marble forward for good education and for all of our students. And that's why I was proposing the previous changes to Rule 2200 that were part of a previous resolution that started to move the process, not make the change overnight, but begin a compromise process that could continue a growth and evolution of public education in our state, but always keeping the quality of it high. So that's my intent. I wasn't trying to be a troublemaker or anything like that, but I wanted to make sure that both many different aspects of the argument of the discussion were articulated.
Okay, thanks for that. I appreciate it. And no, you're not a troublemaker, right? We're here to have a discussion and to come to a collective decision on this, right? So thank you for your kind words about the history piece. I had thrown that together. Shouldn't say thrown together. It took a little while. As I was getting questions here locally as to, how did we get here? And so I'm hoping that the history piece might be helpful to folks. But also what I included in the package were 2 reports from the Vermont auditor one of them, which was hopefully particularly addressing, I think, a question that Mark Koenig brought up at the very end of that discussion last time, and that related to what rules and regulations pertain to public schools or that do not pertain to private schools. Essentially trying to tease out what the sort of the difference in accountability was between the two. I was hoping, right, that those two pieces gave board members, some additional information so that we might be able to continue the discussion tonight. But hopefully what I'm trying to do is come to a resolution, right? No pun intended. We had a resolution that passed at the annual meeting, right? And in my mind, that sort of weighs heavy. And collectively, how do we want to address this, right? Because I want to make sure that we're being true to the process here of having a resolution that was passed at annual meeting, while trying to also navigate some concerns that some of our board members from tuitioning towns have. I'm very happy to open it up to discussion here, try to figure out, how do we move forward.
Well, if I appreciate the article about the difference in public-private regulations. My specific question, though, is more on which of those regulations that public schools have to follow that academies or independent schools don't have to follow are troublesome to those public or private and academies. Which ones do they feel they don't need to follow or don't want to follow that the rest of the public school district wants to? What's hanging up this whole process? Is it because it seems like it's mostly open meeting law and some accounting procedures are the two main ones that I saw when I looked through that document.
Can I
And let me
respond?
Yep, but hang on one second, David, because I want to see if I can sort of maybe focus the question a little bit more. Mark, are you thinking that if we knew the answer to that question, there might be some common ground here that we could all agree to? Is that the direction that we're going here, or?
I'm just not, I'd like a clearer understanding of what it is. Like the resolution was, if you're getting public dollars, you need to follow the same rules and regulations the public schools have to abide by. And there are certain schools that don't fall under public school definition. They're saying we're not happy with that requirement. And I'm not sure which of the pieces that public schools have to abide by that's tripping them up, that they don't feel they need to or want to follow that public schools do. And the question then becomes, yes, it makes sense they shouldn't have to follow those. There's rationale that makes it impossible or silly to do. B, they should follow it. If public dollars are being used, then public dollars should be accounted for in an accounting kind of thing. Or three, that really is a silly regulation, and maybe this group should be talking to legislation about removing that onus from public schools. It's a stupid regulation across the board. No one should have to follow it. But I don't know where the holdup is, where the tie-up is.
Okay. David, I'm going to hold just for 1 second. I'm going to go to Martine.
Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. I am just going to ask a process question, Neil, because although I've been on the board for a few years, I still feel kind of new just because it's all been virtual. And so there may be some things that I'm missing, and I'm not asking this to be snarky in any way, but I'm wondering about the process of what we're doing right now. Are you looking to have a unanimous board vote on this resolution? And is that a typical part of our procedure? Because I'm only asking because it does seem as though we did follow the process of bringing forth a resolution and voting for it at our annual meeting. So I'm just curious about the history of these votes and what is it about this one that obviously didn't follow a proper procedure, because we're looking at it again. I'm just curious.
Those are all good questions. This is a bit of uncharted territory. We have not followed this process previously, unless you consider maybe some of the ruminations that this board had related to some of the items that came out of Act 46, right? After the resolution was passed at the annual meeting, right, I was approached by David Chandler, who wanted to bring this up for discussion with the board. I said, okay, let's bring it up for discussion. We didn't get to any sort of meaningful resolution at the last meeting. I said, okay, let's bring it forward to this meeting. But I guess, Martine, what I would say is I might share your concerns, right? That we did have a resolution that did pass at an annual meeting. I would think it would need to be some fairly serious circumstances that we would modify or change or undo what was passed by membership. While I'm not looking for a unanimous vote this evening, it is possible that we do want to bring this to a vote this evening so that I've got some resolution here on the board of what the path is forward for Sue and the team and for all of us as to how we're going to handle this item. Colleen, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to bring us back to what I believe the question is that's before us. My understanding of the question that's before this board now is not about whether or not to revisit the resolution. I think there's agreement that the resolution was passed. I heard from David, what I was hearing in the meeting was an interest in understanding what that resolution means for advocacy work going forward, if and when some really hard questions come to the VSBA board from legislators, whomever, what's your recommendation for XYZ? So David, you can correct me, but I don't believe you were asking for a revisit on the resolution. I believe the question that was before us was more of a general concept of, well, okay, now we've passed it. What does that mean? Do we have a common understanding of what that means?
Thanks, Colleen. Let me go to Flora.
Mine was similar. I just wanted to make sure that, Martine and everybody knew that, as chair of the resolutions committee, that we follow process and that this resolution is in effect, let's say, until we vote differently. So just wanted to make that clear. Yeah. And then, so can we separate the process? I think we all agree on that, like Colleen was saying. And then if we want to talk more about, how we want to tie or not tie our executive director's hands in how she can go in and give testimony at the legislature, that is totally different to what is the resolution. And that also is unusual, right? But there's no point, there's nothing wrong with talking about it, but I don't think that we are looking for, it's going to be hard on this one to have a unanimous vote of the board. We are looking for a path forward in continuing to lobby at the State House for public education.
Thanks, Flora. Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, I think from David and my perspective, we understand that we went through the process and we passed a resolution, and that resolution is the resolution that's there right now. At the same time, I think that David and I both feel like we haven't been able to communicate or help make everybody understand the potential impacts. Our expectation is that in this coming legislative session or the next couple, this is going to be a very significant issue that's going to be addressed by a whole lot of people in the legislature. And we know that we're kind of we're very focused on this. So we know that there are a lot of different ideas out there as to how to deal with, and it's, you know, viewed as dealing with Carson v. Macon, et cetera. You know, what can you do in response to the current environment? And, you know, there are a number of ideas out there, and some of them, some of those ideas that are somewhat popular could have, you know, for us in our local system could have a very significant and, you know, and from our perspective, sort of negative impact on our system. So we want really everybody to understand that, you know, we have a position that, you know, certainly I think the VSBA would like independent schools to look more like public schools, but just to have everybody understand that, you know, if that some things that could come up and be presented as legislation could have, you know, are some things, you know, there are things that we feel could probably help with the situation and not be, you know, sort of somewhat, you know, threatening to our system of providing education in our area. And there's some that, you know, so, you know, the degree of threat to our system is what we're kind of focused on. So, you know, from our perspective, I think, you know, speaking to Mark's point, Mark Koenig's point a little bit, I mean, the idea of public versus independent, you know, public schools are essentially municipalities. Independent schools are essentially not-for-profits. And they tend to, you know, with a municipality, you run with a very different set of rules, you know, set out by the legislature. Independence, it's just harder to fit into that same mold. So, you know, we tend to look at, when we're looking at, you know, like Mark's question is a really tough one, because, you know, it's when we get to what could we require of independent schools, or, you know, what is unreasonable to require, you just realize you're kind of dealing with apples and oranges here. So you're trying to say this orange has to become an apple. It's not quite as easy as that. So anyway, we, you know, from our perspective, I think, you know, what I'd like is for, you know, David and I, again, we've been trying to help you guys kind of, you know, put you in our shoes a little bit so you can see what the, you know, see how we see this issue. We haven't done the greatest job to date, but we're still hoping to just let people or have people understand, you know, why this is the degree of a concern to us that it is. So.
Thanks, Jim. David, because you've already had a chance to speak once, I'm going to push you sort of to the end of the queue, and I'm going to go to Diane next.
Hi, thanks. Thanks for clarifying that we're not trying to revisit the resolution. What I thought I had heard was that there were, that certainly David and Jim were interested in shaping the conversation going forward in terms of how it was advocated for at the State House. But I think what I come back to is remembering when I had been on VSBA before, and from what I've seen in the past, is that we really don't know what kind of legislation is going to be picked up by the Education Committee or anyone. We don't know what they're going to do with this resolution. And maybe I'm not as clear about what the process looks like. So if someone wanted, like, or Sue wanted to say, now walking into the legislature on day one, exactly what happens to shape legislation. And because the VSBA responds or advocates on a certain position, but we don't sponsor the legislation. So we don't even know what the details are of what they're going to come up with. A lot of this won't work for this group, this won't work for that group, often gets hashed out by the legislators. They are very much aware of the same situation. And I think we all are aware of it. And that's really their battle, and it's ours to respond to it. That's my understanding. So someone can correct that, but that's what I wanted to say.
Thanks, Diane. Michael Inners, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think what Diane just said is very relevant. What Mark said earlier is also very relevant. I think it's important to know we're not going to get everything we're asking for here. We're going in with a position, and I don't think anyone here realistically expects that legislators are going to turn around and say, yep, we're going to put all the rules on the independent schools. I think in some ways we're premature here. It'd be nice to be able to react to what rules might or might not apply, and have a more nuanced position at that point when we know what we're dealing with. And I still haven't heard from sort of, I don't know what to describe, the dissenting voices here, exactly which things they think are not appropriate for private academies that might be appropriate for public schools. And Mark, I think, is a really excellent point with his point. If there are rules that are so onerous that a private academy shouldn't be doing them, maybe the public schools shouldn't have to do them either, because maybe they're just bad policy. So I really would hope that we could, we have the resolution gives us an opening position, something to start with, which is that we think, all or most of the rules should apply. And if we get a position where, we need to back down, dial back from that position, let's see what's on the table. So thank
Thanks,
you.
Michael. Yep. Mark Schauber. You're muted though, Mark. Mark, you're muted.
I'm sorry.
Mark Schauber is trying to talk, but he's muted. And still can't hear you, Mark Schauber. Let me do this. I'm going to skip over to Adrian, and then Mark Schauber, when you get your audio back, we'll go to you. But Adrian, go ahead. Oh, now Adrian is muted too.
Well, I had enabled my computer to hold the shift bar, but apparently not in this program. I have no idea. Sorry. Maybe Mark's doing the same thing. I wanted to also sort of chime in on let's see what's going to happen before we get too upset at how we're going to advocate. And I also wanted to stress that, the public academies, the historic academies, are in a separate category, at least in my mind, compared to a lot of the other independent schools. And, and what Mark Koenig said, maybe there are rules that we all shouldn't have to follow, that they have to follow. But there's still going to be a push, and I can't say that I don't support it, for more transparency. And, every time I hear the argument of, oh, it costs less to send your kid to Burn Burton than it might for how much it's going to cost, say, at my high school at Mill River. No, David, I've heard that argument. I've heard for the taxpayer, it's less expensive. But the fact is, that's because it's made up for in a lot of the private schools by outside fundraising. And I mean, that is not something the public schools can do. And that is going to be an issue. I mean, yes, the school at Burn Burton is a wonderful school, but a lot of what makes it wonderful is their endowment and the fundraising they can do. And, no matter how you look at it, that doesn't feel fair to some other schools. And yes, it's the historic, setup, but that conversation is going to happen. And I really hope that it doesn't feel so personal to the representatives of districts that have that as a choice, because it's just something that needs to be discussed. And hopefully we come up with a fair solution. I'm not out there to try and, kill any system, but I do want to hear some of the solutions to make it fairer than what it is now. That's it.
Thank you, Adrian. I'm going to try Mark Schauber again.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, excellent. New computer, new setup, trying to figure it out. One thing, just in response to what one of the things David said, nothing about this resolution is trying to turn apples into oranges or make the independent schools public schools. This is about the money. It's about accountability of the money and the money that's coming from taxpayers. So I just want to kind of put that context around it. In regards to what Mark and Diane and Michael and Adrian have said, I agree with them. I think this probably is a little premature discussion. I've been asking around and have not gotten good answer about what direction the legislature may take this session on this topic. Maybe other people have more information than I do, but I don't know if we actually have any real idea on what direction we may need to go in based on that at this point. So that's it.
Thank you. Mark Kaufman, go ahead.
Thank you. I echo and agree. I think this discussion is rather premature because we don't know what the final outcomes or what's going to be put on the table in the legislature yet. I would like to see a very succinct white paper about exactly which portions of any legislative agenda would put an undue and onerous burden on the independent schools. I don't want to see that burden placed. I don't want to see students damaged in the future by that, but I don't know what those burdens are yet. If we could see that, then I think we could make a rational comparison with how it fits between the public and the independent schools. And as was pointed out, perhaps, wow, this is just a bad policy and it's time to revisit it on the state level for all educational institutions. That's it.
Thank you. David Chandler, go ahead.
So waiting has helped because I do have the beginnings of a white paper response, I think. Not that I'm wanting to write anything, there's enough on the plate going forward. But I think there are two ways of answering the questions of what are the things that are onerous. I think the first thing is that the best word I could think of is, can we give credit to the independent schools for equivalent standards? So in other words, instead of having every teacher certified through the state, if the school is certified by NEASC, the New England Association for, I forget what it stands for.
Schools and colleges.
Schools and colleges, thank you very much. So if NEASC has certified a school and that includes the teachers, is that equivalent enough that the teachers then don't have to be certified through the state? That would be one equivalent that we could look at. A second equivalent would have to do with the boards, the fact that the boards are public boards for public schools, but for a private school, they're private boards. So, but they have a board, they operate as trustees. The town then approves. I mean, Adrian, I've heard that some schools do cost less. The whole thing about Burton is that it costs more than the union equivalent. So every year our budget includes a supplemental amount that is approved for BBA and other local schools that we provide education access to. So if the average union school that the general fund, the education fund provides is 16,000, BBA is probably going to be another 2,000. The thing is, what they'll tell you is that the equivalent education that they're providing is probably worth 25,000. But that's another discussion we could have. But my point is that there is an accountability and the public has to approve it and has to fork up extra money aside from what goes to the state. And as I've made a point before, about half of the money we raise for education goes to the state and stays at the state. So there are equivalents of accountability and certification and those kinds of things. So if we're allowing Sue, when she's testifying, to say, yeah, the rules don't have to be exactly the same, but if equivalence can be applied, or if she's got wiggle room so that there's room to compromise, so that there's a way to move forward. The other part of my argument, besides equivalence, is that I think there are things that the academies do bring. You know, Adrian raised the point about how private fundraising is something that that the academies do. Well, in our area, we have done the same. We have created foundations that work with our public schools. And though they're not as effective as what BBA does, you can create an education foundation. We had Friends of MEMS. MEMS is the Manchester Elementary and Middle School. There's a Friends of MEMS that contributed a certain amount of money every year that allowed the school to do things beyond the budget. And Dorset had a similar funding for a number of years of $100,000 that allowed them to do a number of things. So it can be done. It's just not a practice that has been done very much. But maybe that should be promoted because it adds more dimension to what schools can offer. So those are my things. Are there equivalents that we can give credit to, and therefore say that some of the independent schools are meeting the standards? And then are there other areas that we can encourage public schools to begin to do more things? That's all.
Thanks, David. Jim Salzgiver, go ahead.
Yeah, while I totally agree that it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen in the legislature, you know, again, when issues are very, you know, near and dear to your heart, you tend to follow them very closely. And just so we've been in touch with all of our local legislators who tend to understand, you know, our issues, and so they're kind of, you know, trying to make sure that, you know, other legislators understand our position. But, you know, in speaking with legislative leadership, you know, and initially what they were getting was an indication that, you know, the simplest solution to this is to just not allow public funds to be paid to independent schools, which would be, and that they were looking at it from that was largely the Carson v. Macon, you know, perspective. And when you in a system like ours, you know, if that were an outcome, that would be very difficult for us, you know, because we don't have public schools that can teach our kids right now at the high school level. But I think, you know, that just to kind of give people, you know, again, a little bit of perspective as to, you know, what we were hearing was that was a very popular concept out there, that would be a great way to solve the religious school issue, is just to not pay tuition, public dollars to any independent schools. And so that, you know, that's the sort of thing that, you know, I don't think that is going to be an outcome under any circumstances, that it's going to be that black and white. But at the same time, that's the sort of thing when you hear that that's a popular position potentially with legislative leadership, then that, you know, it you know, got our antenna up. So
Yeah, just to clarify though, that's not what this body is entertaining, right? Our resolution did not and does not suggest that we just don't pay money to private schools, right? That's not what the resolution says.
well, I just, you know, to me, you know, my read of the new resolution is very consistent with that position, because advocates that, you know, all the rules must apply to any school that gets public funds. So it's saying
that's not the same thing though as saying public funds cannot go to independent or private schools. That's not the same thing.
It isn't the same thing. It's saying if independent schools could look exactly like a public school, then they could get public funds.
And I think maybe what I'm hearing there though is this idea that like, I think that there's two ways to address this, right? You could relax some of the constraints on public schools.
Yep.
Mark Kaufman, is your hand up from before or a new point?
Oh, I'm sorry. No,
Nope,
let
no
me
worries.
clear that.
No worries. I'm going to go to Adrian then.
I did want to answer one thing that David had said, that yes, foundations have been a way to do that, but that brings up the exact question as to why we had Act 60. There are communities that can raise more money easily, and that is not the case for all of our communities. You could set up a foundation in lots of communities, and maybe if you were lucky, you could raise $20,000 a year. I think that's a big problem. And that's all I wanted to say on that.
Thank you, Adrian. Colleen, go ahead.
Adrian, you set me up for this, my comment. So thank you. I try to simplify things, and I also want to reflect on my experience within our own communities when we went through the Act 60, when we went through the merger study and what the resistance was in the community, and there was great fear related to what's this larger centralized system going to take away from our local community. So to me, a lot of our conversation is related to the degrees of autonomy and the degrees of centralization. What must be the same, what can be different. And I'll just give an example of one place where our community said, we don't want to touch this right now. And that was related to fundraising. I mean, way back in the 1990s, I live in Heinsberg. Heinsberg was a poor farming community. And when they were receiving and sending towns, we were in the same supervisory union with 3 gold towns. And we could not have common conversations about curriculum in our communities because we just didn't have the same kind of funding. And so, the state stepped in and we got legislation, Act 46, that helped move the money around a little bit differently. And it made such a huge difference in our ability as a supervisory union to work collaboratively. And then when it came to the merger, we were so ready to move this step to the merger. And we actually asked the state for help. We can't do this without state legislation on this. And the biggest resistance that we were hearing were fears of losing something, losing autonomy, losing the ability to have unique qualities within our schools. And unlike Burlington, that can have different academies because of the geographic proximity, when you have kids that have to travel 12, 20 miles, you don't have that same kind of flexibility. So I guess it's just a long way for me to say that the way I am observing this conversation, it's one of centralization versus decentralization. And at some point, the ability of local communities to raise money for extracurricular activities is going to rise to the attention someplace. And that might be some of the fear that we're seeing in communities that are resistant. But, every community is raising money for extracurriculars. I don't know anyone that's not.
Thank you, Colleen. Diane, go ahead.
Yeah, I think there's a little element of we're getting really far into the weeds here. I completely understand that both Jim and David, it's just listening to you today, you're already advocating for your position with your legislators. You're already getting into the micro details of what is super important to your area. But to bring that conversation to our VSBA board and expect us to agree with that, I think that's a really big ask. So I think that as the legislation and as the priorities move along and we see what the impact is going to be on whether or not we try a new funding formula or many of the other ideas that are out there, and the current impact of the other bills around the equity, all of this is going to come up and everyone will be able to advocate for what they need in their regions. And we will have these same conversations again. But I just feel like, as we've been told about VSBA and what our role is for representing the organization, is that we shouldn't be micromanaging this conversation at this point. We understand your positions. They're near and dear to you. And there are other people who have other positions that are near and dear to them. I think we just have to put it on pause, understand each other's points, continue to do the research, and let's see how it plays out.
Thanks, Diane. Folks, I'm trying to figure out where that leaves us, right? We have a resolution that was passed. I would anticipate that in response to legislation that might be offered at the beginning of the session, that resolution is going to help guide Sue's or other members of the VSBA's testimony on this. At this point in time, I don't see a way around that. I can understand maybe some of the points that David was making, if one were to interpret the language of the resolution that says the same rules need to apply, that we could substitute that with somehow equivalent rules need to apply. Maybe that's a reasonable interpretation of the resolution. That's okay, but to think that I guess what I'm trying to say, I'm not seeing a path forward here that allows us to ignore the resolution that was passed, right? I mean, it was determined by membership, and any for David, for Jim, for those folks that sort of brought this forward as a discussion, I don't see anything changing in that regard, right? To the extent that maybe this just kicks the can down the road on another conversation that we have to have after there's some legislation that we need to react to, then maybe that's where they are. But I did think that the resolution plus prior resolutions were pretty straightforward in the position that our membership wanted us to take on these items. So unless somebody is in large disagreement with sort of what I think I'm seeing from the rest of the board on this, I think that that's the path that we're going to take forward at this moment. Diane, did you have something else?
I just wanted to say that I thought that the resolution was sufficiently general enough that I never got into analyzing it, that it would make sure that everything had to be identical. I just never even went there in my mind. So that's because I'm not in the same position as Jim and David are, where they're in a sort of defensive position and looking at it as something that might be an attack. I didn't think of it that way. I thought of it as broad brushstrokes. And so I just wanted to clarify that. And otherwise, I agree with the direction that you're going in, Neil, that we just need to hold off, and we'll have this conversation again, no doubt, as the legislation moves along.
Okay. That being said, I'm a little hesitant about having this conversation multiple times over the course of this session on this item, right? So if I have hesitancy and pause, that is the reason. Jim, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say, this is a helpful conversation. A lot of good points coming up. Appreciate it. I think, part of it from my perspective, I'm on a lot of boards, and my general view is if you're on a board and a board takes a position, then you shouldn't take a position counter to that. And I think, that we could view that, with our resolutions too. I think that, we are doing work with our local legislators, trying to have some, trying to create an understanding and all of our position. And so, to me, part of it is just, it's important for you guys to understand we're not, why we are taking the positions we are, and why it's of concern to us, because I think our districts are going to be advocating on this in maybe a slightly different way than the VSBA is. And I think, it's important for us to explain to you, because there's, with the VSBA, basically just about everything the VSBA does, I've, been 100% in sync with. And if we're not on an issue, then I think it's important for us to just explain, why and what how we're looking at it differently, just to make people understand.
Thanks, Jim. So unless there's, new information that folks want to share, a different opinion, or disagreement with my characterization or the summarization of where I think we are on this, please chime in now, because I am inclined to move us on to the next agenda item. Okay. Thanks, gang. Let's talk about income-based education taxing. So Sue had shared with you, we were waiting for it and got it sort of at the last minute, but Sue shared with all of you the draft report from the committee. I will say, I think that Sue and others, we were expecting there to be some sort of concrete recommendation. And for those of you that had a chance to read it, there really wasn't one. If you look at the conclusion part is blank. But maybe just sort of to get things kicked off here, I want to turn it over to Sue, because I think Sue was reflecting on the piece, taking a look at existing resolutions that we have on the books related to this, and I think had some thoughts about VSBA position or what might be said as far as testimony goes. And so I think that might make sense to have you guys sort of hear from her first before maybe we opine on what the position might be. And Michael, if you're okay, I'm going to, unless you've got a question particular to that, I might pause on that and let Sue go first. Is that all right?
I just thought I thought I did see some recommendations in there. Maybe I was not reading it properly.
The way that I understand the recommendations I saw were if you were going to do it,
Okay.
here's how we suggest that you do it, not we recommend that you do this.
Okay. Yeah, that could very well be, because I have not had time to read the entire report.
Yeah.
Word for word. Thank you.
Sure. Can I kick
Would
it
you
over
like me to go
Sue?
ahead, Neil?
Yes, please.
Okay. So the report does say that the committee had no consensus recommendation regarding the policy question of whether an education income tax should be adopted. It does go on, though, to say that if an education income tax were to be adopted, the committee has recommendations for how that would be structured. And so the details on those recommendations are what is in the draft report. The committee asked me to testify on the draft report this Friday at its final meeting. Others that are going to be testifying are Karen Horn from the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, Jeff Francis from Vermont Superintendents Association, Jeff Fannin from Vermont NEA, and Stephanie Yu from the Public Assets Institute. When I sent you the report, I sent you the VSBA resolution that's related to this issue. It's 2F. Which says the General Assembly should examine alternative funding sources for our education system that are more equitable and sustainable, rather than continue a system that predominantly relies on the property tax for revenue. And when I put this on your agenda, of course, we didn't have the draft report yet at that point. So we were anticipating that there was going to be a recommendation. Since there isn't a recommendation, up or down as to whether or not to do this, I started to put together some thoughts about testimony that I could give on Friday, and I wanted to share those with you to see if it was sort of along the lines of what all of you were thinking. Of course, I would start out by thanking them for the opportunity to provide testimony and for all of their work on this issue, and let them know that Vermont's education funding system is of significant interest to school board members and therefore to the VSBA. I'd let them know about the resolution that I just read to you. And then I would propose telling them that we appreciate the emphasis in the draft report on the 6 pillars of a high quality tax system, because 2 of those pillars relate right back to that resolution. You remember the resolution has the words equitable and sustainable. Well, the 6 pillars are 2 of them are sustainability and fairness. The other ones are reliability, economic competitiveness, tax neutrality, and accountability, and simplicity. Some of those are lumped together. That's why it seems like there's more than 6. And then I think it might be a good strategy to just thank them for not recommending a specific action at this point, because we have the implementation of the weighting study coming up in FY25. And it would be concerning, I think, to school board members to be changing the funding system connected to, our entire education finance system, to be changing all of that in the midst of the weights changing would be a lot of change at once. So, and certainly I could go a little bit more into why that could be problematic, but those are my initial thoughts.
Thank you, Sue. I wanted to know, so does any board member have an issue then with the items that Sue brought up in the planned testimony? Because if we don't, if everybody's in substantial agreement with the points that Sue just made, I don't see that necessarily a need to take some sort of motion on this. If folks are generally comfortable, I think it's just basically a thumbs up that, Sue did her job right, captured the sentiments of the group, and what she's bringing forward, I think, makes sense. Anybody have any concerns?
I like it.
All right. So then we're going to move on to talking about the December 1st letter. And in particular, the surplus recommendation. A couple things that I want to note there. One was that in the letter from the tax commissioner, he noted that the surplus came from, and Sue, correct me if I don't get the wording on this right, but basically unspent money that was intended for special education purposes. And so as we reviewed that and we're trying to figure out, what the VSBA position might be on that, it strikes me that maybe digging into that a little bit, what I have heard from a lot of you and other board members across the state is the acute need for mental health services for students in our school systems based on the pandemic. And it strikes me that if we've got unspent money in the area of special education, maybe we missed something there, and that money should have been spent in some sort of special education related mental health services for students. Beyond that, I also wanted to share with you that the VSBA position on this, so last year when a similar issue came up and there was some surplus funds in the education fund, we also provided testimony on that. And I just wanted to highlight one section out of that testimony that might give you a little sense as to where this body was last year on this topic. And that was that we at a meeting had passed a motion, passed unanimously, supporting using an amount from those education funds to invest in construction aid and also career and tech center education. So I wanted to share that with the group as well too, as maybe we think and opine about VSBA position then on use of the surplus ed funds if Sue's going in to testify on that. With that as background, I'm going to go to Michael Inners.
Yeah, the one thing I found ironic about the unspent special education money is that one challenge that we're facing this year right now in our SU is that the block grant funds were substantially less than expected and substantially less than necessary to even match last year's reimbursements. which causing us to in fact cut positions mid-year, leave them unfilled, et cetera. Probably a much longer discussion that we should put on a future agenda is the impact of how Act 173 is really functioning in terms of what it's doing to local school budgets. It's looking really ugly for us next year, even worse. But I mean, even this year, we've already had to cut. We had to let about $250,000. So 3 positions.
Thanks, Michael. Mark Kaufman, go ahead.
One is just a general question. Please forgive my ignorance. Is there a statutory percentage of unspent funds that could be retained for future emergency use? And second, I just want to echo, we're seeing adaptive difficulties across grade levels that could be addressed through additional mental support services. And I think that would be a great asset to have some of those funds brought back on a per pupil basis.
Thanks, Mark. Sue, do you know the question about statutory obligations on Ed Fund?
Yeah, there is a statutory obligation to have a certain reserve, and that's built into the December 1 letter.
Okay. Adrian, go ahead.
I wanted to sort of reiterate what Michael Inner said. Our budget is very ugly this year, and a lot of it has to do with the lack of special education funding that we're seeing. We lost at least $500,000 in our budget, and that's hard to make up with a school our size. And we've had to have additional staff for mental health issues and just general social emotional learning specialists throughout the district. I would really appreciate if they would just announce early what they are going to do with that extra money, because right now we're budgeting on the fact that it's all going to go to buy down the tax rate. I keep cautioning everybody that that's probably not going to be what happens, but that's what my board is believing. And it's going to put us in a really, really tough position come May or whenever, when they finally decide, if they don't put a significant amount of that money at the district's discretion, return it to the taxpayers so that we can write things into our budget that our district needs, not what they think we need.
Thanks, Adrian. Diane?
Echoing, student support services of all kind, whether they be special education or other support services for mental health and physical health. However, when you've got a surplus, the one thing you don't want to do is invest it in something that'll be a recurring cost. Generally, that's what I hear. So there's a concern about when you apply that, if you're tying the hands of people to continue to have to meet that same obligation year after year once the surplus is done. So it's just being mindful of that. May be something that they're considering and something that we should consider. Certainly if we invest in a lot of mental health providers, that'll be a recurring cost year to year. That's all.
Thanks. Flora?
So, we're seeing the same with mental health, and I think a lot of us had put as one of our pillars in ESSER funds, mental health. I want to say that the two things that we did the last time, and we were not successful putting money in our facilities because of all of the testing that is going to go on, and putting that one-time money in something that we can really take advantage for the experience of our kids in the schools, because and tech education is super important too. The other thing that we were short of doing the last time was I think a lot of us have taken advantage of being able to feed our kids. And I know that that's controversial, but being able to put that in as a recommendation would be huge. It's a great thing for all our schools. So I think those two and adding maybe food will still it makes sense. Not that we will get our wish, but that's my thinking.
Thanks, Laura. Martine, go ahead.
Yes, a couple comments and a question and maybe another comment. First, absolutely, you all know I was a high school teacher for many years. We absolutely need help with mental health at this time, especially coming out of the pandemic. I 100% agree with that. My question around that is, I get asked this question a lot as a school board member. Why is it the schools are having to take on social services that used to be outside of the work of school districts? And with that in mind, I'm wondering, does VSBA have a stance on that issue? How much are we expecting schools to take on in terms of social services and mental health services, and how much should be outside of the purview of a school district? That's one point and question I wanted to make. And the other one was just, we have to stop kicking the can on school maintenance and school construction. This is like a cataclysmic problem, and you're seeing now what's happening at Randolph High School. And I mean, if you want to exacerbate mental health, close the school down and make kids do remote learning for 6 months. I mean, it is a tragedy of epic proportions. So 100% support school construction aid with the surplus. Thank you.
Thanks. Sue, do you happen to know the answer about VSBA position? I mean, I know that we've got the resolution for unfunded mandates, right? But I don't know if we've gone any more level of detail than that.
I will look. I do think there is one, but it'd take me a couple minutes to find it probably.
Okay, while you're doing that, I'm going to go to Colleen.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different ways that we could spend the money. There are three things that I'm thinking of, and I totally advocate for spending money on school facilities. The schools are such a huge investment in our communities, and it's a gathering place. And if that is the place where we provide different services for kids, it's great because they're already there. So I advocate for some kind of money for facilities. We had a presentation at our board meeting last night that, just one data set that was a little bit troubling, and it's absenteeism and the ability to fill, when someone's gone for a day, be able to bring in a substitute or backfill on that role. And the numbers are just so high, it's a huge problem. Martine can speak to this as a former teacher. When your system internally gets stressed, it affects everybody. So I don't know if there's something related to that. Maybe that's the social, emotional, mental health piece. I'm also concerned about the pipeline into education, and perhaps pipeline into education support could be one-time spending. Maybe there's a grant-funded program, but that gets complicated as well. So probably the easiest advocacy, easiest implementation piece would be related to some kind of money going to facilities.
Thanks, Colleen. Dan, go ahead.
So I know this is not going to be popular, but the $90 million they're talking about, that is only a down payment toward the capital expenses we need in the state. So you could throw a whole bunch at it, and it just wouldn't get very far. It would be distributed so broadly. That's not to say that I am glad to be able to say that, but look at every school, add them all up. It just comes to many, many millions of dollars. And I think there just has to be a better way for the state to go about funding that. I guess I wanted to say, we just got our first budget look from our finance director today. I haven't had a chance to really look at it, but our finance director is predicting that the yield will simply go up by the amount of that $90 million. From about $12,000 to I think about $15,000. So what I think our board is going to do is shuffle that extra money that will come in because of that increased yield into special ed because of the loss, as others have pointed out, that we are seeing from Act 173. So just, yes, we are supposed to use it to reduce property taxes, but if we have any security about that yield going up and our tax rates coming down, we will ask our taxpayers to budget that towards special ed in the upcoming budget. Of course, it's too early to know any of this stuff for sure, but just very interesting to see that someone who's in the know is predicting that the yield will go up by that much.
Thanks, Dan. And I just wanted to note, so that's what the tax commissioner forecasted in the December 1 letter, that if they use all of the surplus funds to buy down the tax rate, then you'd be looking at a yield number that was or somewhere around $15,000. I will note, after having, so our legislators came to the school board meeting last night, and all two of them, both of them, universally declared that there is no way that that is going to be the yield number at the end of the session. So I think board members would be wise to assume that it is not going to be that big, that it's going to be a smaller number. And with a smaller number comes a higher tax rate. So I think that is what I am hearing. Mark, go ahead, Mark Koenig.
One of the, we've been having the same issues at our own local board. We were talking budget last night. And do have some surplus and debating what do we do with it. And our thought right now is to put it towards as much capital improvement facilities as possible so that we can do our 3 to 5 year programs in maintaining and rebuilding. One of the concerns we have with giving it all back to the taxpayers, although that feels good and sounds nice, is it just sets the taxpayers up for a cliff for the next year when that cushion is now arbitrarily taken away, and where it would have been a 3-cent increase, now we're looking at a 7-cent increase in 1 year because of what happened with that one-time surplus. And so that would be my main concern, is whether or not we're just setting it up as a cliff for the next year if that surplus isn't there. And I would rather have a steady state tax rate than to have the yo-yo where it's up and down and up and down. You just can't plan for what's going to happen in the coming year.
Thanks, Mark. So I'm going to try to summarize one more time. Man, you guys are making me work tonight. So I think what I'm hearing is general agreement that using the monies for more one-time expenditure kind of items like facilities or capital expenses is desirable. Beyond that, there have been some concerns about the implementation of Act 173 and the amount of special ed block grant monies you've received. To the extent that that is tied to or somehow related to the surplus as a result of special education funds, and I think we want to get to the bottom of that. And then there is also concern over student mental health and maybe providing some support services in that area. Those were the top 3 things that I thought that I heard, if I'm summarizing correctly. Did I miss anything that folks think ought to be on that list? Sue, does that provide enough for testimony?
Yeah, I think it does. And I also wanted to let you know I found a couple of resolutions. 2Q is emotional wellness of students. The VSBA urges the General Assembly to expand funding support to local schools to increase the availability of mental health counseling, emotional wellness, and psychological supports. These efforts will further support schools to meet Vermont's Agency of Education's education quality standards, specifically healthy and safe schools through the whole school, whole community, whole child's models, domains 4 and 7. And then there's one more under 5A, social and medical services provided in schools. VSBA supports the delivery of social and medical services in public schools by use of contracted services for which Vermont schools are reimbursed at full actual cost.
Okay. So board, if you all are okay sort of with the summary that we had there, then I think that is sufficient for Sue in providing any testimony related to the, the call them surplus funds. I don't know if I don't like the word surplus in ed fund, right? But what to do with those monies. Okay. So we are going to move right along in our agenda then, which brings us to the legislative committee report. So congratulations, gang. We made it through our very first ever in the history of VSBA legislative committee meeting. So give yourself a round of applause. I think it went smoothly. But I do want to turn it, I think, Sue, you can maybe cover a little bit about the sort of the work there and the outcome as well too. And then I think we had deputized Tara, I think, to deliver some words of wisdom from this body related to that. So maybe we want to hear from her as well. Yes.
Sure, I'll start and then Tara can finish it up. So the VSBA was contacted by the Agency of Education to participate in a meeting regarding a potential standardization of a statewide kindergarten entry age. And because we don't have an existing resolution on this topic, the legislative committee was convened. They met on November 18th and had a discussion, and their meeting minutes are in your packet. They made a motion to authorize the executive director to advocate on behalf of the VSBA's position, consistent with the discussion of the committee at their meeting, in particular, the need for flexibility at the local level and to advocate for that position going forward in all legislative interactions. So as I said, the minutes are in your packet. Due to a scheduling conflict, I was not able to attend the meeting with the agency. And so I delegated that responsibility to Sandra. She attended along with Tara Sweet and Nancy Russell. And so Tara, I believe, is going to provide the board with some information about that meeting.
Sue Floor was there as well at the meeting.
Oh, right, Floor. I'm sorry, Floor as well. Thank you, Tara.
Yeah. The AOE, we held the meeting with the AOE on December 1st. And the feedback was from all the stakeholders invited was the AOE, the VSBA, VPA, VSA, and the Vermont NEA. We all seem to share the perspective that we didn't feel that there was a problem. It's not a widespread, nor was it a priority for anyone else in the attendance at the meeting. I mean, it's just not one of the things that we think should be at the top of the legislature's to-do list. There was also a shared concern regarding developmental appropriateness of potentially enrolling younger children in kindergarten. And the AOE suggested that there is a need for the data regarding the current kindergarten entry age policies across the state, because so far that data doesn't exist. And they should be drafting a report for review very soon, as the report was due tomorrow. So.
Awesome. Any questions for Sue or Sandra or Tara on any of this from board members? All right. Thanks so much for the work. I appreciate it, especially going to the meeting and representing us. That was great. All right, moving on then to Act 1 Education Quality Standards. Sue, do I turn that one over to you? Or
yes. This is more of an informational topic for your meeting. There's information in your packet on the status of the Act 1 Working Group's recommendations for changes to the education quality standards. There's no action needed at this time by the VSBA, but we just really wanted to keep you informed. December 15th, tomorrow, the State Board EQS Committee is meeting, and they'll be reviewing the full document and possibly receiving some independent legal review, and possibly holding a committee vote on the draft to be submitted to the full state board. And then on December 21st, the full state board is meeting, and they'll be receiving a presentation from that EQS committee, and most likely it'll be January or February meeting of the state board where they actually vote to move on to the administrative rules process, which involves ICAR and LCAR, as we call them. And that process takes about 8 months. So we just wanted to keep all of you informed because VSBA had a committee that worked on this very hard and wanted to make sure that the people that were on that committee know what was happening.
Any questions for Sue or our committee members on that one? No. Y'all good and hitting that spiced eggnog before the meeting? Like, or you just like everybody got all of their stuff out during those first two agenda topics and now we're just all settled in. All right, that's fair. That's fair. We're going to move on then to Finance Committee and appointment of members. So by my tally, current Finance Committee consists of our amazing treasurer, Mr. Jim Salzgiver, and then 2 board members, Nancy Russell and Mark Schauber. Do I have that right? Nancy isn't with us tonight. Mark, plan on continuing? That's a thumbs up. All right. I would say, so if there are any other board members that absolutely love numbers and finances and want to get in on the game, now's your chance. I know that Jim's he's like really, here's what I would say though. I think for the sake of keeping things manageable, like if there's a huge rush for the door here, people want to get, I think 2 more max, I think I don't want to make the committee so big that maybe it's doesn't work well, but Michael Inners.
Yeah, I'm a numbers guy,
All right.
so I'd be interested.
Okay. Not only could you be interested, you could be appointed.
That's always the risk in expressing interest.
It is, and you're talking to the guy right now, I think, that has the authority to appoint based on recommendation of the board. Board, what do we think? You think Michael Inners is a good choice? All right.
So moved.
I was gonna say, do you need a motion?
I don't think I need a motion. I think I'm just going to appoint Michael Inners to the Finance Committee. If any of you are interested and just a little bit shy, you can certainly reach out to me later if you want. But assuming that Nancy is going to continue on, I think that we look to be, pretty fully staffed, and so I think we're in a good spot to move forward on that. All right. Gonna move on then to employee handbook revisions. All right, so first thing I'd say, don't freak out, right? Because if you looked at it, it looked like there was a lot of stuff that was crossed out, and then it looked like there was a lot of stuff that was added. But Sue's gonna walk us through it. It's all gonna be good. It's a good change, but it's not terrible. It's not huge.
Right. So the original impetus behind the revisions to the employee handbook was equity. And Sandra took the lead in making those changes, supported by an equity consultant, Kate England from IEG, which is a company that that worked with us through the Vermont Community Foundation grant. So we were lucky to get the input of an equity consultant on the changes. All references to he or she have been eliminated and replaced with language that does not specify gender. Additionally, a diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging statement was added at the beginning, and Juneteenth was added as a holiday. Bennington Battle Day was eliminated as a holiday in order to keep the total number of holidays at the current level. Also, the new mission and vision were added, and the old were deleted or taken out. After these changes were drafted, I asked Attorney Pietro Lynn to review the handbook to make sure it complies with current employment laws, because that hadn't been done in a while. And I thought we as long as we were making changes, we needed to make sure that it was in compliance with the law and had the recommended language in it. So most of the other changes that you see in the handbook are based on his recommendations. The major one being a rewrite of the non-discrimination and anti-harassment policy language. This rewrite makes the language in our handbook consistent with the language in our model policy that we provide to school boards on this topic. And that was what Pietro recommended. A few other changes are under the benefits section. The retirement plan section was revised to be consistent with this board's decision last spring to contribute 10% of base salary to employees' 403B retirement plans. In the past, it had been 5%. So that change in the handbook was just made to be consistent with what had already been decided on that topic. Additionally, the sick leave section was modified to allow sick leave to be used for the employee's parent as well as their child and spouse. And the acknowledgement section, we added language requiring employees to acknowledge through their signature that they have reviewed the diversity and inclusion statement and agree to abide by it, and that they agree to complete training on bias, non-discrimination, and anti-harassment. So that outlines really the major changes. And sometimes it's a little, I apologize, it's a little difficult looking at the actual document because of the word, Microsoft Word noting revisions. Sometimes it'll look like something was eliminated, but it was actually just moved to a different spot. So if anyone has any questions about anything, I'm happy to answer them.
Board, so I am going to look for a motion for this body to approve the handbook changes. So if you do have questions, let's get them out there. Floor, go ahead.
So move to accept the changes to the handbook.
A second from Mark.
Thank you, Floor. So Floor with the motion, Mark Kaufman with the second. Any discussion on the proposed employee handbook changes?
I just wanted to say thank you. I really appreciated the first 2 pages, especially on all the bullet points, and just like really proud how we're living by example now after all that we've done and all the training. So just thank you to the staff for taking the time and bringing it all together.
Thanks, Floor. Any other questions, comments? All right, seeing none, then all those in favor of the motion to approve the employee handbook changes?
Aye.
I am going to count that as unanimous. Awesome. Moving right along, gang. Next up is the new VSBA Strategic Plan Monitoring Report, and it is new and improved, now aligned with new vision and mission. So for those of you that has been with us for a while, we have had the Strategic Plan Monitoring Report, and it has been an awesome tool for the board to stay apprised of all of the great work that the staff is doing that is directly tied to mission and vision and goals of the organization. And then we changed our mission and vision, and then we changed the goals. And so staff were like, oh, great. But they did an amazing job. And what we want to show you tonight, I think is the template, or at least part of it, the revised Strategic Plan Monitoring Report with some handy dandy tools to show you how to read it and understand it.
Would you like me to explain it?
That would be
Neil?
awesome. Yes, please.
Okay, I will do that. So as Neil noted, earlier this year, this board did a lot of work in a strategic planning process led by Phil and Sandra. And the result was the beliefs, vision, mission, and goals that are set out on page 138 of your packet. And VSBA membership adopted those proposed changes to the bylaws, which include the new vision and mission. So the vision and mission were adopted by the membership at the end of October. And meanwhile, the VSBA staff has been hard at work developing a new strategic plan monitoring tool based on the new beliefs, vision, mission, and goals. And you'll notice that the format is similar to our previous monitoring tool. with the addition of measurable indicators, also referred to as key results. We tried to make things measurable wherever we could. The new monitoring tool is in your packet. And so the reason we've put it there is so that we can get your feedback on it before we start using it on a monthly basis for your board meetings. And I could talk about, I'm just trying to move to us. There we go. Okay, so as you'll remember, you have, and these are included on page 138, goals that were developed by the board. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4 of them. So those goals are in those goal areas are in the strategic plan monitoring tool. If you look on page 139, you'll see goal area 1, stakeholder engagement. And then we have different objectives underneath that goal. The first objective is increase engagement with local school board members. Then if you move over to the right, we've got what are the key results that we're looking for that objective. For example, the first one we have there is by December 31, 2025, increase the number of annual communications between VSBA regional representatives and local school board members in their region to double the baseline level of FY23 as measured by a communication tracking tool. So we would be developing a communication tracking tool that would be used, and so that we could get a baseline, and then we would be working to increase those communications. Another example right below it is the annual conference. By December 31, 2025, increased school board member participation in the VSBA annual conference from 89 in 2022 to 400 in 2025. So that's those are examples under the first objective. And then, you can just continue down and see that the second objective under that goal area is engage with external stakeholders. And we have some key results for that as well. Moving on, goal area 2 is systems and resources. And the first objective under there is to provide relevant and timely information regarding systems, resources, and professional development for school board members and boards as measured by satisfaction surveys that allow for disaggregated data on respondents. And like the first indicator under that one, if you look over to the right, is has to do with people who are potential school board candidates. So conduct at least one annual webinar for potential school board candidates that has at least 40 registrants and an overall satisfaction rating of at least 4.5 on a 5-point scale by January 2024. So, and then there's a bunch of other goals or other indicators, I should say, under that objective that you can check out. And it continues on with objective 2.2 for goal 2, and then goal area 3 is advocacy for public education. There's objectives for that area. And then the fourth goal area is model policy. And there are indicators for that as well, objectives and indicators for that as well. So hopefully that kind of grounds you in what we what we set up and how we're proposing to monitor our work. But we're happy to have your input on this because it's really just still in the development phase.
Colleen, go ahead.
This is really excellent work. So, and thank you for sharing this while you're still in the formative stages of it. I was just, quickly, just some brief feedback related to 1.2, the engagement with stakeholders. You used language in other later objectives, such as with 2.1 related to satisfaction surveys. I mean, you could put some measures in there that, maybe there's a survey that goes out once a year, or, think about different ways that you could get an understanding of, well, what is a positive, the words positive, necessary support, strong relationships. I mean, how do you measure that? And it might be numbers of times that you're planning to meet in a year, or you might have some kind of focus forum or quick 5-question survey or something. But if you're looking for measures, it looks like you did it in the other objectives, but didn't have it with 1.2. But this is really great work. Thank you.
Thanks, Colleen. Dan MacArthur, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with Colleen. Nicely done. One of the things that concerns me is you're proposing some webinars for potential school board candidates, and I just don't know how we find them. I mean, I can understand that VSBA would promote the webinar, but are we really going to find them? Again, not to be too cynical about it, but if anybody has any ideas for how to reach out, dare I say, a younger cohort as well, and try to get them to be the people who would attend these webinars, it would just be, it would be great to brainstorm that as much as possible. And if I come up with any good ideas, Sue, I'll certainly be in touch with you. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan. I think part of what Dan said there, and I don't know if it was intentional or not, was I hope folks can take away from this, while these are goals for the VSBA, they don't belong solely to just the staff, right? So I think that I want to make sure that we all recognize that there's work in here for each one of us as well too. I don't think I'm gonna put it all on the back of the staff in order to increase enrollment at the annual meeting. I think a lot of that work is going to come from us as well too. So just hope folks are taking that message away from this as well. Mark Schauber, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yep. Nicely done,
Right.
sir.
So a suggestion on in regards to those webinars, or maybe another fantastic video like the education video that is now a few years old. Put it out on the local community cable channels.
Thank you.
We do have a PSA that we run a few years on all the community stations for running for school board.
Cool. Amy, go ahead.
I think that as representatives, we could also inform our regions that if there are people who are not planning on running for re-election, that they could advertise the VSBA workshop on recruiting candidates. And kind of put it back on also our the districts in our regions.
Thanks for that, Amy. Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, on the overall format of the goal presentation, I think it's good. It's it may prove to be a little. It may prove to the blocks may need to get a lot bigger as activities happen. That's only happened in our local boards where we're starting to do something similar to this in our supervisory union, superintendent's report, and the text and the text, the activities in progress has gotten a lot bigger. On the specific issue of school board candidates, I would suggest that most candidates, their first contact is probably with the town clerk to get petitions and stuff, and maybe giving information to the town clerks that they can give to potential candidates would be the most targeted outreach.
Another good suggestion. And yes, Michael, I agree. And I think what we'll see is that as the work progresses in here, we'll see the monitoring report will expand and grow, as it gets filled out. But yeah, I think Sue, right, the intent is it would be included in the board packet at each board meeting so that that's the way that the board stays apprised of what's going on with staff and the work that they're doing, which I will add was one of the outcomes, sort of tangential outcomes from the last executive director's review, was the board just wanting to make sure that they stayed in tune with what was going on with the inner workings of the VSBA. Colleen, go ahead.
Does our data system have the ability to put out those little pop-up, how is the service, and you can rate it 5 stars or something like that, where you just get an instant feedback? Was this information useful? Yes, no. Do we have that ability within the systems?
At
That
the
could
end
be
of
an
our
easy way to
webinars,
collect data.
at the end of our webinars, we have it set up to have automatically, there's 4 questions that ask at the end.
Well, and I'm just thinking, like, if someone clicks on a link within the weekly newsletter or something like that, that there's just not even 4 questions, a single question. Was this helpful, not helpful, thumbs up, thumbs down? I don't know, something like that. Make it really super simple.
Thanks for the suggestion. I think the short answer is we don't know, but maybe take a look into it. Any other comments, suggestions related to the proposed monitoring report? Okay. For those of you that have gone through this before, like if you've updated goals in your district and then try to figure out like how do you track your progress on all of these things, I got to say the work that the staff did on this, I mean, this is good tool. Like I was talking to Sue earlier today. I was like, I think we could turn this into a webinar that would help folks. How do you get from making the goals to then tracking them? And I have found over the years that this tool that we've used and now tweaked a little bit is just, it's really well done. So, Amy, go ahead. Oh, you're muted though, Amy. Now you've got Mark Schauber disease. You're still muted. Yeah, sorry, we are not picking it up. All right, we'll see if it comes back for later. So thanks for that, Sue. It sounds like folks are generally, things are looking good on that. So I think that's good to move forward with. Next up in the agenda is board self-evaluation. So board members, for those of you that were around last year or last summer, you might recall that one of the items that came out actually of a discussion related to the executive director evaluation was actually the desire for this body to actually engage in more training. So not necessarily something that Sue is responsible for, but nonetheless, Sue has been doing a great job of making sure that we stay on task on this effort. So to that end, Sue and I have talked with another, I think, former board member from up in Maine who has done board training before for boards. And what we're looking to do is put together a series of trainings for this board that would happen probably over the course of 2 to 3 meetings. I thought it was better to break it up rather than giving it all sort of in one shot at one meeting. We'll cover probably 2 to 3 particular topic areas related to board governance. But one of the things that will sort of kick off the whole process is the board's self-evaluation. So no action from you all this evening. Just wanted to give you a heads up that sometime after the beginning of the new year, we will come to you with a board self-evaluation. I'm going to encourage everybody to fill it out. And I'm hoping in part that some of the responses that we get out of that can also help guide us as to where we think we might want to focus some training or some time or some reflection from this group so that we can improve you know, and move forward and be, you know, as good a functioning body as we possibly can. So, like I said, nothing that you need to act on tonight, basically just a heads up that it is gonna be coming your way. Next item is consider reducing the number of board meetings. Just a show of hands, like locally, how many of folks here think they have too many board meetings locally? Seriously, you guys all got it dialed in just right? Like everybody's happy with the number of meetings that you've got? Dan MacArthur's shaking his head. I swear to God, I think it's like something that our board constantly complains about like every year, and then we just never end up doing anything about it. That being said, one of the things that I have discovered from talking with Sue and some of the other staff members is it may look easy for you all by the time that we get to this point, but the effort that the staff puts in to prepare for these meetings, whether they're remote or in person, it's a lot of work. And one of the things that we're trying to do is see if there's a way that we can relieve some of that work. And I just happened to be perusing the bylaws and found out, hey, we are not required to meet every month. So one of the things that I wanted to put forward to you guys is, would we all be okay if we looked at decreasing the number of VSBA board meetings throughout the year? And I'm going to be even a little bit more particular than that, and I'm going to propose that we skip the January meeting. And I got a couple of reasons for doing that. One is that it actually comes, because we meet the second Wednesday of the month, it actually comes pretty early in the legislative session. So I don't know that there's going to be a whole lot for us that we're going to need to respond to. B, if there is something that we need to respond to, it's probably going to come up pretty quick, and we have the new legislative committee, so I think that we would be able to handle it that way. C, staff, I think, are going to be flat out at when the legislative session starts, so to give them some measure of relief from having to put together another board meeting, I think it might work well. And fourth, I didn't even think I had four things. Fourth, if you all didn't notice, I crammed the December agenda filled with stuff in the anticipation that maybe we could skip January. But I wanted to bring this forward to all of you guys. A, just to find out generally, are you okay with the concept of reducing VSBA board meetings? And B, specifically, are folks okay if we skip the January meeting?
Yes to both.
All right. I'm seeing head nods. I'm seeing thumbs up. So you, all right. So, man, that was a tough sell, right? A one fewer, one less board meeting. Okay. Thank you, gang. Appreciate that. Finally, well, I shouldn't say finally, but next up, item number 12 is the consent agenda, which includes the November minutes. Anything in the November minutes that folks saw that needed to be changed, updated, modified? Mark Schauber, go ahead.
It's a spelling of my first name as the Wyndham rep on the legislative committee.
Okay, we will change that to Sam.
Perfect.
Just kidding. Any other items in the minutes that needed adjustment? All right, seeing that those are all of the adjustments, I'll look for a motion to approve the minutes with that adjustment.
Sweet will make that a motion.
Thank you, Tara. Who would like to second it? Martine gets the second on that. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the consent agenda, please raise your hand and leave it up. Dan MacArthur, you good? All right, I see unanimous on the consent agenda. New business. Sue, I just wanted to give you a brief chance to give folks an update on some of the work with the Necrason group. And as we go to do that, Carrie, can I ask you to just stop the recording for this portion? Recording back up again.
Great, thanks.
Yep.
All
Michael,
set?
did you have a question before Sandra goes, or?
Just a quick, I don't know if you do agenda building at the end in this board or not, but I do want to put evaluation of how Act 173 is actually being implemented somehow into our agenda for a future meeting.
Okay, I will note that. Sandra, go right ahead.
Okay. We wanted to talk a little bit about how we are gearing up for the upcoming legislative session. So based on the information we have right now, we anticipate that the operations of the General Assembly will be similar to what we saw at the end of the 2022 legislative session, which was committees were mostly in person. Witnesses were invited to be in person. Some were still remote, and small committee rooms, some of them had limited capacity, really trying to still keep the number of people in small spaces low. And then the utilization of the YouTube video live streamed and recorded was provided throughout the session. We anticipate that again. If anyone has any updated information, please share, because our planning is based on what we know in the moment. So the pivot to the remote access in 2020 allowed our small staff to easily access the activity at the State House virtually, either live or through recording. It also changed the way we interacted with legislators who were not available to us to chat with in the hallway, in the cafeteria, walking, to the State House. So we just lost access to those personal communications. And we've been thinking a lot about this and planning for the 2023 session. We believe it's going to be incredibly important to be present at the State House, having conversations and developing relationships with the legislative body. That's going to be representative of about 30% turnover this session. So a lot of new people, even new chairs, lots of folks very new to the process, people we don't know yet. We're excited to prioritize having a presence at the State House, and we're committed to keeping our membership informed about legislative activity. In addition to developing important relationships, we'll be better able to monitor how the session is being shaped, what issues are likely to be taken up, and what advocacy needs might occur. The legislative report and the legislative alerts will continue. However, our limited resources don't allow for the continuation of the weekly legislative blog and the podcast. Those were a result of COVID and a shift to virtual methods. We are really looking forward to the in-person interactions of the legislative body during the upcoming session, and we will remain flexible as the session progresses. So we really just wanted to update you to let you know we're returning to pre-March 2020 operations in this session coming up.
Thank you, Sandra. Mark Schauber, go ahead.
Do we have any idea who's going to be chair of House Ed at this point?
Peter Conlon.
Yeah. Peter Conlon, did you pick that? Yeah. Any other questions? Hey, I think that change makes complete sense, Sandra. All right. I wrote down Michael's request for some Act 173 report card for a future meeting. Anything else that folks would like to see this body address at a future meeting? Martine.
I just actually had a question when we were talking about board self-evaluation, and I was wondering how many school boards represented here tonight do self-evaluations?
You all want to raise your hands?
So about half, maybe. Okay, thank you.
Sure. Any other new business tonight, gang? I got to admit, when the agenda was like over 100 pages, I did not think that I would be done at 6:55. I'm sorry, that you would be done at 6:55. No, the applause goes to you. So I will say, out of all of the boards that I sit and I work on, don't tell anybody else, but I like you guys the best. right? This is the one that actually has great conversation. Y'all do your homework, which I cannot tell you how much I appreciate. And you care about, I think, multiple sides of every issue, and that's important. So we won't see each other in January, hopefully. But I hope that you all have a wonderful holiday, whatever one you celebrate, that it's a good season, that you resolve in the new year to re-up for another 3 years on your local board, and that you just have a great time. Okay, I appreciate the heck out of you guys, all of you. I really do. You do some amazing work for this state and for education. So thank you so much.
Thank you to leadership also. You all are amazing.
Thank you.
All right. Anybody want to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion to adjourn by Mark Kaufman. Is there a second?
Second.
Second
Diane.
by Diane. All those in favor, just click the leave button in Zoom.
Thank you.
New Year,
Good
everyone.
night.
Stu, do you
Thank
have just
you.
a
Night.
quick moment after the meeting?
Yes.